April 17, 1944. Near the fog-shrouded forests of Stalag Luft 3 in Lower Silesia, 3 American airmen shivered in the back of a Wehrmacht transport truck, their wrists bound with coarse rope that cut into their skin with each jolt of the uneven road. Staff Sergeant Marcus Wilson of the 322nd Fighter Group stared at the armed guards across from him, calculating the odds of survival that seemed to diminish with each passing mile. If only they knew what awaited them behind those camp gates, they might have attempted escape right then and there. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the extraordinary account of how 3 Black American airmen would use an unexpected skill to not only save themselves, but transform the very nature of their captivity in ways that would challenge everything both captors and prisoners believed about war, race, and human dignity. The truck lurched to a stop at the entrance to Stalag Luft 3, a prisoner of war camp specifically designed for captured Allied airmen. The 3 Americans, Staff Sergeant Marcus Wilson, Technical Sergeant James Ellison, and Flight Officer Robert Jenkins, were roughly pulled from the vehicle. All members of the famed Tuskegee Airmen, the pioneering Black Aviator unit that had proven their worth in the skies over Europe, despite the prejudice they faced both at home and abroad. "Raus! Schnell!" barked Hauptmann Otto Müller, the officer overseeing their transfer. His weathered face betrayed no emotion as he assessed the new arrivals with cold efficiency. Marcus Wilson straightened his back despite his exhaustion. At 24 years old, the Philadelphia native possessed both the physical resilience of youth and the mental fortitude developed through years of facing discrimination. Before the war, he had studied at Howard University, majoring in Germanic languages with dreams of becoming a professor. Now those academic pursuits seemed like memories from another lifetime. "Namen und Dienstgrad," Müller demanded, expecting the typical confused looks he received from American prisoners. What happened next caused the German officer to freeze momentarily. "Staff Sergeant Marcus Wilson, United States Army Air Forces, Serial number 1385742, Wilson replied in flawless, accent-perfect German. The Hauptmann's eyebrows rose slightly, the only indication of his surprise. He turned to the next prisoner. James Ellison stood at attention, his lean frame showing the weight loss of recent weeks since his P-51 Mustang had been shot down over Bremen. The 26-year-old from Harlem had learned German from his maternal grandfather, a German immigrant who had married Ellison's grandmother shortly after the First World War. Technical Sergeant James Ellison, United States Army Air Forces, serial number 1598341, he stated in equally proficient German. By now, Müller's professional composure had cracked noticeably. His mouth opened slightly before he collected himself and moved to the 3rd prisoner. Robert Jenkins, at 22, the youngest of the 3, had grown up in Milwaukee, where his father worked as a translator for a German-American newspaper. Jenkins had absorbed the language throughout his childhood, becoming fluent by his teens. Flight Officer Robert Jenkins, United States Army Air Forces, serial number 094288763. Jenkins said, his German perhaps the most natural of the 3, with traces of a Bavarian accent that reflected his father's origins. The assembled German guards exchanged glances of astonishment. The propaganda they had been fed portrayed Black Americans as uneducated, primitive, and certainly incapable of mastering the German language with such precision. This unexpected linguistic ability created an immediate cognitive dissonance that would have profound implications for how these 3 men would be treated. "Interessant," Müller muttered, before switching to English. "You will be processed and assigned to the American compound. Follow me." The processing center was a stark wooden building where new prisoners surrendered personal items and received their meager camp provisions: a thin blanket, a metal cup, and basic toiletries. As Wilson, Ellison, and Jenkins stood in line, they couldn't help but notice the stares from both German personnel and fellow Allied prisoners. Lieutenant Colonel Heinrich Brandt, the camp's intelligence officer, observed the 3 black airmen from across the room. Word had already reached him about their unusual linguistic abilities. In his 47 years, Brandt had developed a reputation for thoroughness and attention to detail. A career military man with a background in military intelligence, he had been assigned to Stalag Luft III after recovering from wounds sustained on the Eastern Front, a posting he initially considered an insult but had come to appreciate for its intellectual challenges. "I wish to speak with these men," Brandt informed Müller, who had been overseeing the processing. The three Americans were led to a small office where Brandt sat behind a desk cluttered with files and reports. Unlike many of his colleagues, Brandt had traveled extensively before the war, including a 2-year posting at the German embassy in Washington, D.C., which had given him a more nuanced view of American society than Nazi propaganda allowed. "Please be seated," Brandt said in German, gesturing to 3 wooden chairs. The Americans exchanged glances before sitting down, uncertain what this interview portended. "I am Lieutenant Colonel Heinrich Brandt, intelligence officer for this camp," he continued in German. "I admit I am curious about your linguistic abilities. It is unexpected." "We're full of surprises, sir," Wilson replied in German, maintaining eye contact with the officer. Brandt leaned back in his chair, studying them. "Where did you learn to speak such excellent German?" Wilson explained his academic background, while Ellison and Jenkins described their family connections to Germany. "Fascinating," Brandt said, switching to English. "You understand, this creates an unusual situation. Most of our guards speak little or no English. Having prisoners who understand German so well presents certain security considerations." "We understand, Colonel," Wilson said. "We're simply airmen who have been shot down. Like any prisoners, we just want to survive until the war ends." Brandt nodded slowly. "The war's end may be further away than you Americans believe. But that is not my concern. My job is to maintain security in this camp while adhering to the Geneva Convention." He paused, seeming to make a decision. "You will be housed in Barraque 7 with other American airmen. I advise you to keep to yourselves and avoid unnecessary attention. This camp holds over 10 Feeds-Out prisoners from various allied nations. Not all will be welcoming to men of your background." The unspoken meaning was clear. Even in captivity, the 3 airmen would face prejudice from their own countrymen. It was a reality they had lived with their entire lives and throughout their military service. "One more thing," Brandt added as they stood to leave. "I will inform the guards about your language abilities. Do not attempt to use this skill to deceive or manipulate. Such actions would have severe consequences." As they were escorted to Barracks 7, Wilson whispered to his companions in English, "Keep your heads down and eyes open. This isn't just about surviving the Germans." The barracks was a long wooden structure divided into small rooms, each housing 8 prisoners on 4 sets of bunk beds. When Wilson, Ellison, and Jenkins entered, the conversation among the other occupants ceased abruptly. Captain Thomas Reynolds, a bomber pilot from Texas, who had been in the camp for 7 months, approached them. "You must be the new arrivals. I'm Captain Reynolds, senior American officer in this barracks." The 3 men saluted. "Staff Sergeant Wilson, Technical Sergeant Ellison, and Flight Officer Jenkins reporting, sir," Wilson said. Reynolds returned the salute with minimal effort, his expression neutral but his eyes cold. "You'll take bunks 17, 18, and 19 in the far corner. The last occupants were transferred out last week." "Thank you, sir," Wilson replied, recognizing the deliberate segregation. The far corner was the coldest, draftiest part of the barracks, furthest from the small stove that provided minimal heat. As they moved to their assigned bunks, a voice called out from across the room, "Hey, aren't you guys Tuskegee Airmen? The Red Tails?" The speaker was Lieutenant Michael O'Malley, a P-47 pilot from Boston, who had been shot down during a mission over France 3 months earlier. "Yes, sir," Ellison replied, 332nd Fighter Group." O'Malley grinned and approached them, extending his hand. "Well, shall be damned. You boys saved my ass over Regensburg in January, swatted away 2 Focke-Wulfs that had me dead to rights." The 3 exchanged surprised looks before Jenkins shook O'Malley's hand. "Just doing our job, Lieutenant." "Call me Mike," O'Malley said. "Anyone who's kept me breathing gets that privilege." He lowered his voice. "Listen, not everyone here is going to be friendly. Some of these guys have never served with Negroes and carry their prejudices from home, but you've got friends here too." This unexpected alliance would prove crucial in the coming days. As the new prisoners settled in, they quickly learned the camp's routines. Morning roll call at 600 hours, meager rations of black bread and thin soup, occasional Red Cross packages that supplemented their diet, and the constant surveillance by guards from watchtowers and patrol paths. The camp was designed to make escape nearly impossible. Beyond the barbed wire fences and guard towers, the surrounding forest extended for miles, offering little chance of finding civilian assistance. Still, escape attempts were a constant element of camp life, coordinated by a secret committee known as the X Organization that evaluated and approved plans. On their third day in camp, Wilson, Ellison, and Jenkins were approached by an older prisoner as they walked the perimeter of the exercise yard, a daily ritual that helped maintain physical condition and mental sanity. "Gentlemen, a moment of your time," said the man, who introduced himself as Flight Lieutenant William Cavendish of the Royal Air Force. "I understand you speak German rather fluently." "Word travels fast," Wilson observed. "Indeed it does," Cavendish replied. "Particularly interesting words. I represent certain interests in the camp that might benefit from your unique skills." Wilson exchanged glances with his companions. "What kind of interests?" "The escape committee, of course," Cavendish said quietly. "Your language abilities could be invaluable. Intercepting guard conversations, helping prepare forged documents, coaching escapees on proper German phrases." "That sounds like a good way to get shot," Ellison said bluntly. "All escape work carries risks," Cavendish acknowledged, "but consider the intelligence value. You hear things the guards say thinking no prisoners understand." Before they could respond, they noticed Lieutenant Colonel Brandt watching them from near the fence, his expression unreadable. "We'll consider it," Wilson told Cavendish, "but right now I think we're attracting unwanted attention." That evening, as prisoners gathered in the barracks after the evening meal, an unexpected visitor arrived. Feldwebel Kurt Wagner, a senior non-commissioned officer who supervised the guards in their section, entered with 2 armed escorts. "Wilson, Ellison, Jenkins," he announced. "Kommen Sie mit." The 3 exchanged concerned glances. Being summoned by guards in the evening rarely signified anything positive. "What's this about?" Reynolds demanded, exercising his authority as the senior officer present. "Befehle vom Kommandanten," Wagner replied curtly. "Orders from the commandant." As they were escorted across the compound, Wilson whispered, "Remember, give nothing but name, rank, and serial number." They were brought to the administration building and into a conference room where Colonel Werner Schröder, the camp commandant, sat with Brandt and several other German officers. On the table lay a stack of letters and what appeared to be transcripts. "Gentlemen, please sit," Schröder said in heavily accented English. "You are not in trouble." Quite the opposite. The 3 Americans remained standing, suspicious of this unusual situation. "I insist," Schröder continued, his tone hardening slightly. "This is not an interrogation." Reluctantly, they sat across from the German officers, maintaining the rigid posture of soldiers in the presence of enemy commanders. "I have been informed of your unusual linguistic talents," Schröder began. "This presents an opportunity that may benefit both you and the administration of this camp." "With all due respect, Colonel," Wilson replied in German, "we are not interested in collaborating with the enemy." Schröder's lips tightened momentarily before he composed himself. "I am not asking for collaboration, Sergeant. I am proposing a practical arrangement." He gestured to the papers on the table. "We have a significant backlog of prisoner mail requiring translation and censorship. Our German translators are overwhelmed and mail is delayed for months. I propose that you 3 assist with translating American mail, under supervision, of course, to expedite the process." The offer was unexpected. Mail was the lifeline of prisoner morale. Letters from home provided emotional sustenance, as vital as the food in Red Cross parcels. "Why would you trust us with this?" Jenkins asked. "Trust is irrelevant," Brandt interjected. "You would work under supervision, and all translations would be verified by our staff. But your assistance would speed the process considerably." "And what do we get in return?" Ellison inquired, his expression guarded. Schröder exchanged glances with his officers before responding. "Additional rations, private quarters in the administration building rather than the overcrowded barracks, and priority mail privileges for yourselves." The offer was tempting. Improved living conditions and extra food could mean the difference between survival and the slow deterioration that claimed many prisoners. Yet accepting special treatment would certainly mark them as collaborators among their fellow Americans. "We need to discuss this privately," Wilson said. Schroeder nodded. "You have until morning to decide. Consider carefully, gentlemen. This offer will not be repeated." As they were escorted back to their barracks, the three men remained silent, each contemplating the implications of the German proposal. Upon returning, they were immediately surrounded by curious prisoners demanding explanations. "What did the Krauts want?" Reynolds asked, suspicion evident in his tone. Wilson explained the offer honestly, which prompted mixed reactions. Reynolds and several others immediately accused them of potential collaboration, while O'Malley and a few others suggested the position might provide valuable intelligence. "You could be our ears inside the administration building," O'Malley pointed out. "Or they could sell us all out for extra sauerkraut," countered Lieutenant Howard Pearson, a bomber navigator from Alabama, whose hostility toward the black airmen had been evident from their arrival. The debate continued well into the night, but ultimately the decision belonged to Wilson, Ellison, and Jenkins. They huddled in their corner of the barracks, speaking in hushed tones. "This could be a trap," Ellison warned. "Get us to incriminate ourselves somehow. Or it could be exactly what they said," Jenkins countered, "a practical solution to their staffing problem." "Either way, we'd be isolated from the other prisoners," Wilson noted. "That might not be a bad thing given some of the attitudes here, but it would make us targets if anyone thinks we're collaborating." "We could use the position to gather intelligence," Ellison suggested. "Learn about troop movements, camp security, maybe even help the escape committee. If they're offering this to us specifically because we speak German, they'll be watching us like hawks," Wilson reasoned. "We won't get away with anything obvious." After hours of deliberation, they reached a decision. The next morning, they were brought back to meet with Schroeder and Brandt. "We accept your offer," Wilson informed them, "with one condition." Schroeder raised an eyebrow. "Prisoners are hardly in a position to impose conditions." "It's simple," Wilson continued. "We want it clearly communicated to all prisoners that we're working as translators to expedite mail delivery, not as informants or collaborators." Brandt nodded slightly, a gesture of professional respect. "That can be arranged. Your work begins tomorrow. Feldwebel Wagner will escort you to your new quarters today." Their new accommodations were modest but private, a small room in the administration building with 3 cots, a table, and chairs. The luxury of privacy after months of communal living was almost disorienting. That afternoon they were provided with extra rations, real coffee, white bread, and even a small portion of sausage, food that most prisoners hadn't tasted since their capture. "I feel guilty eating this," Jenkins admitted as they sat around the table in their new quarters. "Save that guilt," Ellison advised. "We need to stay sharp for whatever game the Germans are playing." Wilson broke his bread thoughtfully. "Remember what my grandmother used to say. Sometimes you have to go along to get ahead. Let's see where this leads." The next morning their work began. In a small office adjacent to the camp's mailroom, they were presented with stacks of letters to and from American prisoners. Their task was to translate the English letters into German for the censors, who would then approve or redact content before allowing the mail to proceed. Feldwebel Wagner supervised their work directly, sitting at a desk near the door. At 45, Wagner was a veteran of the First World War who had been recalled to service due to Germany's increasing manpower shortages. Unlike the younger guards indoctrinated with Nazi racial ideology, Wagner's views had been formed in an earlier era and tempered by years of civilian life as a postal worker in Dresden. "You will translate exactly, word for word," Wagner instructed. "Any attempt to conceal or alter content will result in punishment and termination of this arrangement." The work was tedious but engaging, a welcome mental stimulation after months of numbing captivity. Each letter offered a glimpse into another prisoner's life, anxious wives inquiring about husbands, parents writing to sons with forced cheerfulness, children's crayon drawings sent to fathers they barely remembered. The human drama contained in these simple communications was both heartbreaking and life-affirming. The German censors were primarily concerned with military information. escape plans or morale-damaging content about German defeats. Otherwise, they allowed most personal news to pass through. Births, deaths, financial difficulties, even relationship problems. The three translators worked diligently, knowing that each letter they processed would reach its intended recipient that much sooner. As days turned into weeks, an unexpected dynamic developed. Wagner, initially stern and distant, gradually relaxed his vigilance as the three Americans proved reliable in their work. He began to engage them in conversation during breaks, first about the letters they translated, then about more personal matters. "You mentioned you studied at university," Wagner said to Wilson one afternoon as they paused for a coffee break. "What did you plan to do after graduation?" Wilson hesitated, unsure whether this was casual conversation or intelligence gathering. "I wanted to teach German literature, Goethe, Schiller, Hesse." Wagner nodded appreciatively. "Educated men, all of you. Not what our leaders say about Americans, especially—" He stopped himself. "Especially Negroes." Wilson finished for him. "No, I imagine not." Wagner had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Propaganda is the same in every war. I remember in the last one how they portrayed the French, the British, made them into monsters." He sipped his coffee. "Then after the war, I met some. Ordinary men, like me." This small acknowledgement of shared humanity, however limited, represented the first crack in the wall of enemy identity that separated captors and prisoners. Meanwhile, their fellow American prisoners had mixed reactions to their new status. O'Malley and a small group remained friendly, occasionally visiting when permitted. Others, including Reynolds and Pearson, openly called them collaborators, despite the official explanation of their role. "Don't let it bother you," O'Malley advised during one visit. "Half those guys hated you before you got this assignment anyway. At least you're doing something useful." The most significant development occurred in their fourth week as translators. Lieutenant Colonel Brandt called them into his office one evening after their normal working hours. "Gentlemen," he began without preamble, "your work has been satisfactory. The mail backlog is reducing at an acceptable rate." "Thank you, sir," Wilson responded, wondering why this assessment couldn't have waited until morning. "I have a new assignment for you," Brandt continued, "one that requires absolute discretion." The three exchanged wary glances. "The International Red Cross has been receiving complaints about treatment of prisoners in this camp," Brandt explained. "Specifically allegations of food hoarding by certain barracks leaders at the expense of other prisoners. The Commandant wishes to investigate these claims internally before the Red Cross arrives next month." "What does this have to do with us?" Ellison asked. "You will serve as translators during interviews with American prisoners," Brandt stated. "Some guards report hearing complaints, but they cannot understand the details. You will translate accurately so we can identify if certain officers are indeed violating the distribution protocols." The request placed them in a difficult position. Assisting with an internal investigation would certainly be seen as collaboration by their fellow prisoners. Yet corruption in food distribution was a serious concern that affected the health and survival of everyone in the camp. "This puts us in an impossible position," Wilson objected. "We'd be seen as informants." "Your role would be confidential," Brandt assured them. "Only translating, not identifying individuals." "Why not use your own German translators?" Jenkins asked. "The prisoners speak more freely when they believe they are speaking only to fellow Americans," Brandt explained with pragmatic frankness. "You would pose as new administrative assistants for prisoner welfare." The ethical dilemma was complex. If some American officers were indeed hoarding food while others starved, exposing this could save lives. But betraying fellow prisoners, even corrupt ones, violated the unwritten code of captivity. "We need time to consider this," Wilson said firmly. "Of course," Brandt replied, "but not too much time. The investigation begins in 3 days." That night, unable to sleep, Wilson paced their small room. "This is different from mail translation. This crosses a line. But if some guys are stealing food while others go hungry, don't we have an obligation to stop it?" Jenkins argued. "Our obligation is to our fellow Americans," Ellison countered. "Period." "Even the ones who called us niggers the day we arrived?" Jenkins asked pointedly. Even the ones who think we're not real Americans? Wilson sat heavily on his cot. This isn't about them, it's about us, what we can live with. The moral calculus was impossible. Refuse and potentially allow vulnerable prisoners to continue suffering, accept and violate the fundamental solidarity that kept prisoners alive and sane in captivity. What if we set conditions? Wilson suggested finally. We translate but remain anonymous, and we demand that any Americans found hoarding food are punished by having their extra rations distributed to the sick bay, not confiscated by the Germans. After another day of deliberation, they presented their conditions to Brandt, who surprisingly agreed. For the next week, they translated during confidential interviews with prisoners selected by the Germans, their identities concealed behind a screen. The investigation revealed that 2 barracks leaders had indeed been skimming food from Red Cross parcels, selling items on the camp's black market in exchange for cigarettes and other contraband. As promised, the extra food was redistributed to the camp hospital, where the sickest prisoners received desperately needed nutrition. The corrupt officers were disciplined by being transferred to a different compound, their positions given to elected replacements. Though their role remained officially secret, rumors inevitably spread. The complex politics of the camp meant that some prisoners viewed the investigation as justified, while others saw it as German interference in prisoner self-governance. For Wilson, Ellison, and Jenkins, the experience reinforced their isolation, neither fully trusted by their fellow Americans nor accepted by their German captors. This ambiguous status created a unique vantage point from which they observed the inner workings of both worlds. In the mailroom, they continued their primary work, developing an unexpected rapport with Feldwebel Wagner and the German administrative staff. Wagner, in particular, began to share small confidences, complaints about supply shortages, rumors of German defeats that official announcements denied, even occasional comments about the camp commandant's drinking problem. One rainy afternoon in late May, as thunder rumbled in the distance, Wagner entered the mailroom looking unusually troubled. He dismissed the guard normally stationed at the door, closed it behind him, and approached the 3 Americans. "I must speak with you," he said in a low voice, switching to English, something he rarely did. "Privately." Wilson set aside the letter he had been translating. "What's wrong, Feldwebel?" Wagner glanced at the door, then pulled a chair closer. "New orders have arrived. All Jewish prisoners are to be transferred to a different facility next week." The 3 Americans exchanged concerned looks. By 1944, rumors about the fate of Jews in Nazi-controlled territory had filtered even into POW camps. "Which facility?" Ellison asked. Wagner shook his head. "The orders do not specify. But it is not another Luftwaffe camp. The transfer will be handled by the SS. The implications were chilling. The Luftwaffe, which ran POW camps for airmen, generally adhered to the Geneva Convention. The SS operated under different rules entirely. "How many Jewish prisoners are in this camp?" Wilson inquired, trying to gauge the scale of the situation. 23 identified, Wagner replied. "But there may be others who did not declare their religion when processed." "Why are you telling us this?" Jenkins asked directly. Wagner looked uncomfortable. "I fought honorably in the last war. I was a prisoner myself in France. They treated me according to the rules. This—" he gestured vaguely. "This is not how soldiers behave." The 3 Americans sat in stunned silence. This German NCO was not only expressing dissent, but seemingly asking for their help. A remarkable development that contradicted everything they had been taught about the enemy. "What do you expect us to do?" Wilson asked cautiously. "I cannot directly interfere," Wagner said, "but if these men were warned, perhaps they could become ill. Too ill to travel, or perhaps their religious identification could be misplaced in the records." This surprising proposal represented an enormous risk for Wagner, one that could result in his court-martial or worse if discovered. "You're suggesting we help you sabotage official orders," Ellison stated bluntly. Wagner stiffened. "I am suggesting nothing. I am merely informing you of administrative matters that may affect prisoner welfare, which falls within your authorized duties." The pretense was thin, but it provided minimal deniability. As Wagner left, The three translators sat in troubled silence, weighing the enormous responsibility that had just been placed on their shoulders. "If we do this and get caught, we'll be shot," Jenkins said finally. "If we don't, 23 men might die," Wilson countered. Ellison rubbed his face wearily. "We don't even know most of these guys. Some of them are probably British or Canadian, not even Americans." "Does that matter?" Wilson asked quietly. The moral question hung in the air between them. Their unusual position, Black Americans in German captivity, neither fully accepted by either side, had created an unexpected freedom to act according to conscience rather than allegiance. After lengthy discussion, they developed a plan. Through their mailroom work, they had access to the camp's administrative records, including prisoner religious designations. Over the next 3 days, working carefully during moments when supervision was lax, they systematically altered records, changing J designations for religion to P for Protestant or C for Catholic. They also spread word through O'Malley to the Jewish prisoners, advising them to report to sick bay with symptoms of dysentery if they were called for transfer. The day before the scheduled transfer, Colonel Schroeder summoned Brandt to his office, visibly agitated. "The SS transfer unit arrives tomorrow and our records are in disarray," Schroeder fumed. "They demand 23 prisoners, but our updated list identifies only 7 Jewish airmen in the entire camp. How is this possible?" Brandt maintained his composure. "Perhaps there was an error in the initial count, Herr Kommandant, or perhaps some prisoners were already transferred without proper documentation." "The SS will not accept such excuses," Schroeder said, his face flushed with anxiety. "They will investigate. They may question our management of the camp, or worse, accuse us of deliberate obstruction." "I will personally review all prisoner intake forms," Brandt assured him. "But may I suggest that we simply provide the 7 we have identified? The SS unit is scheduled to visit 3 other camps on this operation. They may accept the smaller number rather than delay their entire schedule." Schroeder nodded reluctantly. "See to it immediately, and Brandt, ensure that our American translators are not visible when the SS arrives. Their presence would require explanations I prefer to avoid." The next day, 7 Jewish prisoners, those whose records couldn't be altered in time, were gathered for transfer. However, 5 had reported to sick bay with severe gastrointestinal symptoms, leaving only 2 cleared for transport. When the SS officer in charge demanded explanations, Schroeder presented medical documentation of a dysentery outbreak and offered to have the remaining prisoners transferred once they recovered. Unwilling to risk his own men contracting dysentery and faced with a schedule that required him elsewhere, the SS officer departed with only 2 prisoners, promising to return in 3 weeks for the others. Those 3 weeks would provide crucial time for further interventions. The morning after the SS visit, Brandt called Wilson, Ellison, and Jenkins to his office. His expression was unreadable as they stood at attention before his desk. "An interesting coincidence," he began, his tone neutral. "A dysentery outbreak precisely when it would prevent a prisoner transfer, and records that suddenly cannot identify Jewish prisoners who were clearly documented upon arrival." The 3 Americans remained silent, their faces impassive. "If I were investigating such coincidences," Brandt continued, "I might examine who had access to medical supplies and administrative records. I might question certain American translators whose moral objections to SS policies might outweigh their adherence to regulations." Wilson met Brandt's gaze steadily. "Sir, we translate mail, nothing more." A tense silence filled the room. Finally, Brandt nodded slightly. "Indeed, and you will continue to do so. However, your access to administrative records will now be restricted. You will work only with correspondence, not personnel files. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," Wilson replied, recognizing the implicit message. Brandt suspected their involvement, but was choosing not to pursue it, a remarkable act of discretion that suggested his own moral calculations might be more complex than they had assumed. As they returned to their regular duties, the 3 Americans realized they had crossed an invisible threshold. They were no longer simply prisoners awaiting liberation or the war's end. They had become active agents within the camp's moral ecosystem, using their unique position to protect vulnerable inmates. This realization brought both purpose and danger. If their actions regarding the Jewish prisoners were discovered by others in the German command, the consequences would be severe. Yet having exercised their capacity to resist in this small but significant way, they found it impossible to return to passive captivity. In the weeks that followed, they developed subtle methods of resistance that leveraged their position without triggering suspicion. When translating outgoing mail, they selectively interpreted certain passages to remove content that might be censored, preserving communication between prisoners and their families. When processing incoming mail, they occasionally added small notes in the margins, "Wife in good health" or "Son received your letter," details that censors had removed but that provided emotional comfort to recipients. Their most significant ongoing intervention involved the camp's medical supplies. Through careful manipulation of translated requisition forms, they helped redirect additional medicines to the prisoners' infirmary, where American and British doctors treated ailments that the German medical staff often ignored as insignificant. June turned to July, and signs of Germany's deteriorating military situation became increasingly evident in the camp. Guard rotations changed as younger soldiers were transferred to combat units, replaced by older reservists or men with combat injuries. Food rations for both prisoners and guards diminished, though Red Cross packages continued to arrive intermittently. Most tellingly, the demeanor of the German officers shifted from confident authority to tense alertness as news of Allied advances filtered through despite censorship efforts. On the morning of July 20th, an unusual stillness fell over the camp. Guards remained in their towers rather than conducting normal patrols, and the daily administrative routine was disrupted. Wilson, Ellison, and Jenkins arrived at the mailroom to find it locked, with no sign of Feldwebel Wagner or the other German personnel who normally supervised their work. "Something's happening," Ellison muttered as they stood uncertainly in the administrative building's hallway. They were about to return to their quarters when Lieutenant Colonel Brandt appeared, his uniform immaculate, but his face drawn with stress. "Come with me," he ordered without explanation, leading them to his office and closing the door securely behind them. For several moments, Brandt stood silently, appearing to organize his thoughts. Finally, he spoke in a controlled voice. "There has been an attempt on the Führer's life," he informed them. "A bomb at his headquarters in East Prussia. Reports are contradictory regarding his condition." The three Americans exchanged startled glances. An assassination attempt against Hitler represented a seismic event in the Nazi power structure. "The situation is fluid," Brandt continued. "Some military units may have been involved in the plot. Until clarity emerges, all prisoner activities are suspended. You will remain in your quarters today." "Yes, sir," Wilson acknowledged, recognizing the extraordinary nature of Brandt sharing such sensitive information with enemy prisoners. As they turned to leave, Brandt added, "Should certain elements gain control of the government, the treatment of prisoners might change, for better or worse. Be vigilant." This cryptic warning suggested dimensions to Brandt's political position that they had not previously considered. Was he merely being cautious, or did his sympathies lie with the conspirators against Hitler? Throughout that day and the next, the camp remained on lockdown as Germany's leadership crisis unfolded. By the third day, they learned that Hitler had survived, and a brutal purge of suspected conspirators was underway. When normal operations resumed, they noticed subtle changes: increased security measures, new political officers visiting the camp, and a strained formality among the German staff who had previously engaged with them casually. Feldwebel Wagner, when he finally returned to supervise their mail translation, appeared haggard and withdrawn. He spoke only when necessary and avoided the informal conversations that had become routine in previous months. After a week of this tense atmosphere, Wagner requested that Wilson help him carry a heavy box of records to the storage room, a task that required them to walk alone through a secluded corridor. "My cousin was arrested in Dresden," Wagner said softly once they were alone. "An army major. They think he knew about the plot." Wilson maintained a neutral expression. "I'm sorry to hear that." "They're watching everyone now," Wagner continued, "especially those with responsibility for enemy prisoners. Any kindness shown to Americans or British is viewed with suspicion." The implication was clear. Their relatively humane treatment The small allowances and courtesies that had developed over months were now dangerous to the German personnel who permitted them. "We understand," Wilson replied. "We'll be model prisoners. No special requests, no conversations beyond necessary communication." Wagner nodded gratefully. It would be best for everyone. This new reality forced Wilson, Ellison, and Jenkins to adapt once again. They continued their translation work with mechanical efficiency, avoiding unnecessary interaction with their supervisors. They declined the coffee breaks that had become customary, ate their meals quickly and alone, and returned to their quarters immediately after completing their daily assignments. Yet even as they reduced their visible interactions, their covert efforts continued. If anything, the aftermath of the July 20th plot made their acts of resistance more meaningful, as they witnessed the Nazi regime's paranoia intensify and conditions throughout the camp deteriorate. August brought news of the Allied landings in southern France, adding to the momentum of the Normandy invasion in June. The distant thunder of artillery could occasionally be heard on still nights, though whether American or German was impossible to determine. Inside the camp, rationing became more severe, and guards grew increasingly nervous as their eventual capture by advancing Allied forces became a realistic possibility. In late August, Colonel Schroeder was replaced as camp commandant, recalled to Berlin for consultation, but never returning. His replacement, Colonel Friedrich Krause, represented the harder line emerging in the wake of the failed assassination attempt. A dedicated Nazi Party member, with an Iron Cross from the Eastern Front, Krause immediately implemented stricter controls throughout the camp. During his first inspection of the administrative facilities, Krause questioned the presence of American prisoners working in the mailroom. "This arrangement precedes my arrival, Herr Oberst," Brandt explained, using Krause's formal rank. "It ends today," Krause declared. "Enemy personnel should never have access to administrative functions, regardless of supervision. It represents a security breach I will not tolerate." Brandt attempted to argue the practical benefits of the translation service, but Krause was unmoved. Wilson, Ellison, and Jenkins were ordered to collect their belongings and return to the regular prisoner barracks immediately. As they packed their few possessions, Brandt visited their quarters briefly. "I regret this change," he said formally, aware that he might be observed or reported. "Your services have been valuable to the efficient operation of the camp." "Thank you, sir," Wilson replied with equal formality. Brandt hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "The mailroom will be closed tomorrow between 1300 and 1400 hours for inventory. The cabinet in the far corner contains duplicates of all outgoing mail for the past month, organized by barracks number." This information, delivered without context or explicit instructions, was clearly meant as a final opportunity, for what purpose they could only speculate. Their return to Barracks 7 received mixed reactions. Some prisoners welcomed them with genuine warmth, while others maintained the suspicion that had followed their special assignment. Captain Reynolds, still the senior officer in the barracks, assigned them to their original bunks in the far corner. "Back to living with the regular folk," he commented dryly. "Hope you remember how it's done." O'Malley, now promoted to captain after a battlefield commission was confirmed through Red Cross channels, immediately approached them. "Good to have you back," he said sincerely. "Things have been getting tense around here with the new commandant. We could use some fresh intelligence." That evening, as the barracks settled into the quiet of curfew, O'Malley joined them in their corner, speaking in hushed tones. "The escape committee has been planning something big," he confided, "but we need current information on guard rotations and security protocols. After months in administration, you must have observed patterns." Wilson exchanged glances with Ellison and Jenkins. Their knowledge of camp security was indeed more detailed than that of prisoners confined to the barracks and exercise yard. Moreover, Brandt's cryptic message about the mailroom suggested a final opportunity to access valuable information. "We might be able to help," Wilson acknowledged, "but we'll need a diversion tomorrow at 1300 hours. The next day, while most prisoners and guards were focused on a staged confrontation between O'Malley and another American officer near the mess hall, Wilson slipped into the administration building through a service entrance that they had identified during their months working there. Moving quickly through empty corridors, he reached the mailroom, finding it unoccupied as Brandt had indicated. The cabinet in the corner contained not only duplicates of outgoing mail, but also hidden behind them, a folder of security directives, guard rotation schedules, and, most valuably, a map showing the locations of minefields surrounding the camp perimeter. Wilson photographed these documents using a miniature camera that the escape committee had concealed inside a hollowed-out Bible, one of many ingenious tools created by prisoners during years of captivity. Completing his task in less than 10 minutes, he returned to the exercise yard without detection, passing the camera to O'Malley during a seemingly casual handshake. That night, O'Malley revealed the significance of the intelligence Wilson had acquired. "The escape committee has been planning a major breakout for months," he explained, "but we've been missing crucial details about external security measures. What you've provided fills those gaps." "How many men are involved?" Ellison asked. 87, O'Malley replied. "The largest coordinated escape attempt in the camp's history." "When?" Jenkins inquired. 3 weeks from now, September 23rd. We're digging 3 tunnels simultaneously to divide German attention if one is discovered." Wilson considered this information thoughtfully. "The war is moving this way. Allied forces might reach this area in a few months. Is it worth the risk when liberation could be on the horizon?" "That's exactly why the timing is critical," O'Malley explained. "The Germans are preparing contingency plans to evacuate prisoners if Allied forces get too close. We've intercepted orders suggesting they'll move everyone eastward, deeper into German territory, farther from advancing Allied lines. Some fear we might end up in camps the Russians would liberate, with uncertain consequences for American prisoners." This perspective highlighted the complex calculations that governed prisoner decisions in the war's final stages. As Nazi Germany's position became increasingly desperate, the treatment of prisoners might deteriorate dramatically, or be used as bargaining leverage in ways that violated international conventions. "Count us in," Wilson decided, after brief consultation with Ellison and Jenkins. "Whatever we can do to help." Their involvement in the escape planning added purpose to their return to regular prisoner status. Over the following days, they shared their accumulated knowledge of German procedures, personnel, and potential weaknesses in camp security. Their ability to understand guard conversations provided ongoing intelligence that helped the escape committee adjust their plans as German security measures evolved. On September 10th, less than 2 weeks before the planned breakout, an unexpected development disrupted the camp routine. A new transport of captured Allied airmen arrived, including 15 black aviators from the 332nd Fighter Group, fellow Tuskegee airmen who had been shot down during recent missions over Germany. The new arrivals were initially housed in a quarantine barracks, standard procedure to prevent the spread of disease. Wilson, Ellison, and Jenkins immediately requested permission to visit their comrades, a request that required approval from both American and German camp authorities. Captain Reynolds was reluctant. "Quarantine exists for a reason. No exceptions." "With respect, sir," Wilson countered, "these are our unit members. We can provide orientation to camp procedures and help them adjust more quickly." Reynolds remained unmoved until O'Malley intervened. "I'll authorize it as the barracks security officer. Besides, having all the colored airmen together might simplify things for everyone." The implied segregation was obvious, but Wilson accepted it as a practical compromise. "Thank you, sir." When they visited the quarantine barracks the next day, the reunion with their fellow Tuskegee airmen was emotional. Among the new prisoners was Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Davis, Jr., commanding officer of the 332nd Fighter Group and the highest-ranking black officer in the Army Air Forces. His presence immediately changed the dynamic among both prisoners and guards. "Wilson, Ellison, Jenkins," Davis greeted them formally before breaking into a smile. "Damn good to see you boys alive." "Likewise, sir," Wilson replied, saluting sharply. "We thought you were still raising hell over Italy." Davis's expression sobered. "Was, until last week. Focke-Wulf got me during an escort mission over Munich. Engine caught fire. Had to bail out." He glanced around the barracks. "So this is home now?" "For the time being, sir," Wilson said carefully. "Things are fluid." Understanding the implied message, Davis nodded slightly. I imagine they are. Why don't you gentlemen bring me up to speed on the camp situation? During the hour they were permitted to visit, they provided a carefully edited overview of camp operations, subtly conveying that significant developments were underway without explicitly mentioning the escape plan. Davis, an experienced officer adept at reading between lines, grasped the situation quickly. "I understand you three have been here several months," he noted. "Any special assignments during that time?" Wilson explained their role as translators, including their eventual return to regular prisoner status. Davis raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. Your language skills must have provided unique insights." "Yes, sir," Wilson confirmed. "Very educational." Before departing, they arranged to meet again the following day, establishing a regular communication channel that would prove crucial in the coming weeks. The arrival of additional black airmen, particularly a lieutenant colonel, created a new dynamic in the camp's social hierarchy. Previously, Wilson, Ellison, and Jenkins had been isolated anomalies, tolerated but marginalized within the prisoner community. Now, with 18 black officers and enlisted men present, they constituted a visible and cohesive group that could not be so easily dismissed. This changing dynamic coincided with increasingly dire news from the German perspective. Allied forces continued to advance on both Western and Eastern fronts, creating anxiety among camp personnel about their eventual fate when Germany's defeat became inevitable. On September 15th, 8 days before the planned escape, Lieutenant Colonel Brandt requested a private meeting with Wilson, an unusual development since their removal from administrative duties. "Sergeant Wilson," Brandt began formally when they were alone in his office, "I have been authorized to form a special prisoner detail for essential maintenance work. I would like to request your participation, along with Sergeant Ellison and Officer Jenkins." Wilson maintained a neutral expression, suspicious of this sudden assignment. "What kind of maintenance work, sir?" "Repair of water distribution systems," Brandt replied. "With winter approaching, we must ensure all barracks have functioning heat and water. Your previous performance in administrative roles demonstrated reliability that makes you suitable candidates." The explanation seemed plausible, but the timing, so close to the escape attempt, raised concerns about potential German awareness of the plan. "I would need to consult with my senior American officer, Lieutenant Colonel Davis," Wilson said, testing whether Brandt was aware of Davis's arrival. "Of course," Brandt nodded. "The new arrivals from your fighter group. I have already spoken with Colonel Davis. He has no objection, provided the work complies with the Geneva Convention regarding prisoner labor." This confirmation that Brandt had already coordinated with Davis suggested the assignment might be legitimate. Still, Wilson remained cautious. "When would this detail begin?" he inquired. "Tomorrow morning," Brandt stated. 800 hours. You would report to the maintenance building near the eastern perimeter. The work is expected to continue for approximately 10 days. The time frame encompassed the planned escape date, another potentially suspicious element. Wilson thanked Brandt for the consideration and promised to discuss it with Ellison and Jenkins. That evening, after confirming with Lieutenant Colonel Davis that Brandt had indeed consulted him, the three airmen debated whether to accept the assignment. "It could be a legitimate work detail," Jenkins suggested. "Winter is coming, and the Germans don't want pipes freezing. Or it could be a way to isolate us from the escape attempt," Ellison countered. "Get us away from the barracks where the tunnel entrances are hidden. Either way, it gives us access to a different part of the camp," Wilson pointed out, "near the eastern perimeter, which aligns with one of the planned escape routes." After lengthy discussion, they decided to accept the assignment while remaining vigilant for any signs that it might be a German ploy to disrupt the escape. They informed O'Malley of their decision, ensuring the escape committee was aware of their new position and potential intelligence opportunities. The next morning, they reported to the maintenance building as instructed. To their surprise, they found Feldwebel Wagner waiting for them, rather than the regular maintenance supervisors. "You will be working under my direction," Wagner explained, leading them into a storage room filled with pipes, valves, and plumbing tools. "The work is straightforward, but requires attention to detail." As they organized the equipment, Wagner lowered his voice. I requested this assignment specifically. Lieutenant Colonel Brandt approved it personally. This information suggested a level of coordination between Wagner and Brandt that went beyond normal camp operations, a potential alliance that might prove significant. For the next 5 days, they worked on water systems throughout the camp, replacing damaged pipes and winterizing exposed sections. The assignment provided unprecedented access to areas normally off-limits to prisoners, including the guards' quarters, administrative buildings, and storage facilities. They methodically catalogued security measures, guard concentrations, and potential weaknesses, passing this information to the escape committee during evening meals. On September 20th, 3 days before the scheduled escape, Wagner instructed them to repair pipes in a rarely used storage building near the eastern fence. Once inside, with the door closed behind them, Wagner revealed the true purpose of their assignment. "Certain developments are underway that may affect this camp," he began cryptically. "Lieutenant Colonel Brandt believes you should be informed given your unique position." "What developments?" Wilson asked directly. Wagner hesitated before responding. "Orders have been received regarding the evacuation of prisoners if Allied forces approach within 50 kilometers. All prisoners would be marched eastward, regardless of weather conditions or individual fitness." The implications were sobering. Forced marches in the approaching winter would result in suffering and death for many prisoners, particularly those already weakened by captivity. "When would this evacuation begin?" Ellison inquired. "The orders indicate implementation when American forces cross the Rhine River," Wagner explained. "Current estimates suggest this could occur within 2 to 3 months. This timeline created a new urgency for the escape attempt. Succeeding now meant avoiding not only continued captivity, but potentially lethal forced marches. "Why are you telling us this?" Jenkins asked. Wagner's expression became more guarded. "Lieutenant Colonel Brandt believes that prisoners should have accurate information about their situation. That is all." Despite this deflection, the subtext was clear. Brandt and Wagner were providing crucial intelligence that directly supported the escape effort, an extraordinary act that risked their own safety as Germany's military position deteriorated. "Thank you for the information," Wilson said simply, understanding that acknowledging more would place Wagner in an impossible position. As they continued their work, Wagner added casually, "The storage building's eastern wall was damaged during an air raid last year. The repairs were inadequate. One should be careful not to disturb the structure." This oblique reference to a potential weakness in the camp's perimeter was the most explicit assistance they had received. When Wagner left them to work independently, they immediately investigated the eastern wall, discovering that several concrete blocks had been improperly secured and could be removed with minimal effort. That evening, they conveyed this critical information to O'Malley and the escape committee. The discovery prompted a modification to the escape plan, redirecting 20 men from one of the tunnels to exploit this new exit point. On September 22nd, the day before the planned escape, a final complication emerged. Colonel Krauss announced an unexpected inspection of all barracks scheduled for the following morning, directly conflicting with the escape timeline. This development required immediate adjustments to the plan. During an emergency meeting in the latrine, one of the few places where prisoners could speak without guard surveillance, Wilson, O'Malley, and Lieutenant Colonel Davis discussed options. "We can't postpone," O'Malley insisted. "Everything's in place. The tunnels are complete, the equipment is distributed, and the weather forecast shows cloud cover tomorrow night. Perfect conditions for avoiding searchlights. But a barracks inspection means all prisoners must be present and accounted for," Wilson pointed out. "The moment anyone is discovered missing, they'll sound the alarm." Davis considered the problem thoughtfully. "What if the inspection becomes impossible to complete?" "Sir." O'Malley looked confused. "A distraction," Davis clarified. "Something significant enough to divert all attention from the barracks." Wilson nodded slowly as he grasped Davis's thinking. "The maintenance building near the eastern perimeter. It contains paint, solvents, fuel for the generators." "Highly flammable materials," Davis concluded. "A fire would trigger emergency protocols. All available personnel would respond, including those assigned to the inspection." The moral implications of such an action were complex. Creating a fire risked injury to both prisoners and guards, yet a successful escape might save many lives if forced marches were imminent. "We'd need to ensure the fire was discovered quickly," Wilson stipulated, "controlled enough to create chaos without causing casualties." "Can you access the maintenance building tomorrow?" Davis asked. Wilson nodded. "We're scheduled to return equipment there at 1600 hours, just before dinner roll call." "That's cutting it close," O'Malley worried. "The escape is planned for 2200 hours after final bed check." "It's our best option," Davis decided. "Set something to ignite around 2100 hours, giving guards time to respond and disrupting their normal patrol patterns." The plan set, they returned to their respective barracks. That night, Wilson barely slept, weighing the enormity of what they had committed to do. Starting a fire, even a controlled one, crossed a line from passive resistance to active sabotage, an escalation that could not be morally justified except by the most dire circumstances. The next morning, September 23rd, proceeded with agonizing normality. They completed their regular maintenance tasks under Wagner's supervision, giving no indication of the momentous events planned for that evening. At 1600 hours, as scheduled, they returned to the maintenance building to store their equipment. While Ellison and Jenkins organized tools, Wilson carefully positioned rags soaked in paint thinner near an electrical junction box, arranging a delayed ignition mechanism using a slow-burning fuse improvised from tightly rolled paper. The setup would create smoke and flame sufficient to trigger alarms without causing structural collapse. "It's done," he told his companions quietly as they left the building, approximately 5 hours before ignition. They reported to their barracks for the evening roll call, maintaining normal routines through dinner and the early evening hours. At 20:30, prisoners throughout the camp began final preparations for the escape, gathering hidden supplies and changing into darkened clothing. At precisely 2105 hours, alarms sounded across the camp. Guards rushed toward the maintenance building, where flames were now visible through windows. Emergency protocols activated immediately, searchlights redirected, guard patrols converged on the fire, and the scheduled barracks inspection was postponed. Amid the controlled chaos, the escape began. Small groups of prisoners slipped away through 3 tunnels that had been painstakingly constructed over months, while another group exploited the weakened eastern wall of the storage building. Wilson, Ellison, and Jenkins joined the latter group, guiding them to the exit point they had identified. As they removed the loosened concrete blocks, creating an opening barely large enough for a man to squeeze through, Wagner appeared unexpectedly in the darkened building. For a moment, both prisoners and guard froze in mutual recognition. Then, silently, Wagner stepped aside, making no move to stop them or sound an alarm. "Why?" Wilson couldn't help asking as he prepared to exit through the opening. Wagner's expression was complex, resignation mixed with a kind of peace. "Because in the last war, a French guard looked the other way for me. We are soldiers, not monsters." This simple statement of shared humanity across enemy lines represented the culmination of the unlikely relationship that had developed over months of daily interaction, a recognition that transcended propaganda and national animosity. With a final nod of acknowledgement, Wilson slipped through the opening, followed by Ellison, Jenkins, and 17 other prisoners. They moved quietly toward the tree line beyond the camp perimeter, using detailed knowledge of patrol patterns and minefields to navigate safely. By dawn, 72 prisoners had successfully escaped, an unprecedented number that would strain German resources to recapture them. They separated into small groups as planned, heading in different directions to maximize chances that at least some would reach Allied lines or neutral countries. Wilson, Ellison, and Jenkins traveled with Lieutenant Colonel Davis and 2 other Tuskegee airmen, moving mainly at night and hiding during daylight hours. Their fluency in German proved invaluable when interacting with civilians, allowing them to obtain food and information while posing as foreign workers. A common sight in wartime Germany, as forced laborers from occupied territories supplemented the depleted workforce. After 12 days of arduous travel, evading search patrols, and navigating through increasingly chaotic German territory, they encountered an American reconnaissance unit near the Luxembourg border. Their journey from captivity to freedom was complete, though the war would continue for several more months. In the aftermath, German authorities conducted extensive investigations into the mass escape. Lieutenant Colonel Brandt was initially suspected of negligence, but ultimately cleared when other officers were found more directly responsible for security failures. Feldwebel Wagner received a minor reprimand for being absent from his post during the critical period, but with Germany's military situation deteriorating rapidly, more severe punishment was deemed impractical. Of the 72 escaped prisoners, 47 were eventually recaptured. Wilson, Ellison, Jenkins, and Davis were among the 25 who successfully reached Allied lines, bringing valuable intelligence about German defenses and troop movements in the areas they had traversed. Upon their return to American forces, the airmen faced mixed reactions to their escape story. While military officials debriefed them extensively about German installations and defenses, the role of their unique position as black German-speaking prisoners received less attention in official reports. When Wilson described the complex relationships that had developed with German personnel like Wagner and Brandt, an intelligence officer dismissed it as fraternization with the enemy, rather than recognizing the sophisticated psychological dynamics that had enabled their escape. "They don't want to hear that Germans can be human," Ellison observed privately after one particularly frustrating debriefing. "Doesn't fit the narrative." "Or that we used our initiative," Jenkins added. "That's not in the script for colored soldiers." Despite these frustrations, their successful escape represented a profound personal victory and contributed meaningfully to the Allied war effort through the intelligence they provided. Each man would carry the experience throughout his life, shaped by the realization that human connections could form even across the most fortified boundaries of war and prejudice. After the war, Wilson completed his education and became a professor of German literature at Howard University, occasionally lecturing on his wartime experiences. Ellison worked as a translator for the State Department during the occupation of Germany, helping build bridges between former enemies. Jenkins returned to Milwaukee and became an advocate for civil rights, using his wartime service as a platform to challenge segregation. In 1965, during a conference on World War II history in Geneva, Wilson was approached by an elderly German man he initially didn't recognize. It was Kurt Wagner, now in his late 60s, who had emigrated to Switzerland after the war. "I hoped I might find you here, Professor Wilson," Wagner said, extending his hand. "I have followed your academic career with interest." Their conversation lasted hours, two former enemies reflecting on the strange circumstances that had brought them together and the unexpected humanity they had found amid the dehumanizing machinery of war. Wagner revealed that Brandt had survived the war and was living quietly in Hamburg, having avoided prosecution due to evidence that he had protected Jewish prisoners and treated Allied captives humanely. "He asked me once why he had trusted you three," Wagner recalled. "I told him it was because you spoke his language, not just German, but the language of education, of civilization. It confused him to find that in Americans especially." "Especially black Americans," Wilson finished for him. Wagner nodded, embarrassed but honest. The contradictions challenged everything he had been taught. "Me too." "That's why language matters," Wilson replied. "It forces recognition of the other as human, as complex. Once you truly speak with someone, it becomes harder to make them into a faceless enemy. This insight, that communication creates connection, that understanding another's language opens pathways to recognizing their humanity, remained the most profound lesson of their extraordinary wartime experience. In a world divided by ideologies and prejudices, they had discovered that words could build bridges where none seemed possible, creating spaces for human dignity to assert itself even in the most inhumane circumstances. The story of three black American airmen who spoke German to their captors ultimately transcended the boundaries of a prisoner of war narrative. It became a testament to the power of unexpected connections, to the possibility of maintaining humanity in dehumanizing conditions, and to the complex moral choices that war imposes on individuals on all sides of conflict. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.